Episode 7, The Britannia. Hello everyone, my name is Katie, I'm 24 and living in a small town in Vermont. I'd like to share a story of something that happened to me at work a couple of years ago. To this day, I still don't have a good explanation for everything that happened. I was in college at the time, but working most evenings as a waitress in a local bar restaurant called the Britannia. On the first floor, there were around 20 tables. We had typical bench seating and high chairs at the bar itself. The Britannia wasn't a theme bar as such, but had a lot of old memorabilia from England on the walls and in display cases. It was a cosy place and I enjoyed working there. The interior was mostly wooden with old paintings of England on the walls. Of course, we also had a jukebox and served some really great food from the kitchen out back. There were a bunch of regulars, which is always the sign of a great place to hang out. We had a whole mix from students to the after-work crowd. To give you an idea of the layout, you would walk in off the street. The main seating area was on the right and the bar along the side of the left wall. The doors to the kitchen were just beyond the end of the bar. The restrooms were at the back. The place also had a basement that we kept the beer pumps in, as well as refrigerators and general stock. The basement could only be accessed via the kitchen. Upstairs, there was some office space that was owned by the bar, but only accessible via an unmarked door near the restrooms at the back. It was almost always kept locked. The building was old and had a lot of character. It's well known in the area. Anyway, I remember my first shift. Peggy was the other waitress on duty. She was kind and showed me around. It was a busy shift, but I enjoyed it. The pay wasn't great, but some of the patrons did leave some generous tips. That night, Marco was bartending. It was on that very first night that something strange happened. The guests had all gone home, so I was just cleaning tables with Peggy. After hours, the place had a completely different feel to it. Once you take out the chatter of people and the music, the place became rather echoey. Not scary or anything, but just a very stark contrast of quietness. I remember Peggy took the last of the glasses back into the kitchen whilst I continued to wipe down the tables. All of a sudden, I heard a noise. I couldn't initially place it. It sounded like someone had just knocked on a window or knocked something over. I realised though that something had instead fallen off the wall behind me. It was an antique wooden walking cane. It had an emblem of a ship on it and the initials EB embossed on the handle. I picked it up and looked around. There was a clear place where it had fallen from on the wall nearby. So of course I put it back up on the wall. I didn't think anything too odd about the event other than how it could have happened. The cane rested neatly on two small brackets. To my mind, it couldn't easily roll off unless lifted or pushed somehow. The timing was also a bit unusual, as the bar was now completely still. I would have been more inclined to think it could have fallen off if there were lots of vibrations and noise during the working hours. Either way, I didn't really think too much on it at all. We cleared and locked up for the evening. A shift later that week was the first time I ever felt scared at the Britannia. Again, I was on duty with Peggy, and it was after hours. I'd gone down into the basement to hook up a different beer keg. The used empty one was light enough to remove, but getting a new one in place took a bit of effort to stand upright. The basement was a decent size, and the lighting wasn't great. I don't remember having any specific fear of it though. That was until I heard another sound of something falling down. I stood up from attaching the nozzle to the keg and quickly looked around. I looked into the dark corners and simply said, "Hello?" For a moment there was nothing, but then I swear I saw something move in the corner. It was a person laying on the floor. Naturally, I was frightened. My reaction was to get out of there. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a dark, silent figure that seemed to be reaching out a hand towards me. I then thought I could hear what sounded either like a hiss or a wheeze. I bolted up the stairs and grabbed Marco from the bar area. I told him that someone was down there. Marco led the way down the stairs and I pointed to the corner where I'd seen the figure. Marco was a fairly big guy and ready to drag whoever it was out of there. There was very rarely trouble at the Britannia, but if there was, Marco was the type of guy you wanted on hand. He shouted in a confident voice, "Okay there? It's past closing. time to come out." There was no reply nor any sign of the person. Marco confidently walked the space, only stopping to attach the nozzle to the beer keg that I'd left as I'd ran. He stood, listened, and then poked and slapped various boxes and searched the room. He concluded, "There's nobody here, must have been a trick of the light." We went back upstairs. At this point I was more confused than scared. I was so sure about what I'd seen. I chatted to Marco, who put me at ease. He suggested that the dark figure might have been the result of going from a bright bar to a dark basement, and the hissing or wheezing sound could easily be explained by the beer keg being trapped and the CO2 escaping out. In the light of the bar, it all seemed plausible, but nevertheless, the events downstairs did seem real at the time. Peggy, who had been listening to my account intently, said nothing, but gave Marco some knowing looks. After that, I never liked going down into the basement alone. I seem to remember a few odd things happening after hours, things falling off walls, things like my coat being moved, and occasionally some odd sounds. It was an old building though, so very easy to let your imagination get carried away if you let it. One night though, things finally seemed to make sense. There was a regular called Bill that used to drop in after work for a beer sometimes. Magic Hat was his order, I seem to remember. He was an older gentleman, perhaps in his late 60s. Anyway, he was one of the last in that evening as things were quietening down. Bill was sitting in his usual spot in the corner, when the antique cane fell off the wall again and onto him. I didn't see the cane fall myself, but I was aware that Bill had been sitting down and hadn't moved it. By his reaction, I could see he was simply surprised rather than hurt. I walked over to him and asked him if he was okay. "No worries, just a small thing," he said. He held the cane, looked at it and smiled. "I think old Emmett is trying to tell me it's home time." "Old Emmett?" I asked. "Oh sure, surely you've met him by now." I was rather confused. I didn't recall meeting anyone called Emmett at the bar. Bill then asked me to join him for a moment, and he told me a story of the Britannia's first owner. He said, "The story goes that Emmett still haunts the bar. He used this very cane to get around. He was the original owner of the bar, and he took this cane from the old country. Anyway, it's said that one night he was locking up by himself. Police reckoned that he tripped on the stairs going down into the basement. They found him and his cane at the bottom of the steps the next day. He had died from the fall and lay in the darkness until a waitress found him. It's said that ever since he's stuck around to see over the place. Some people go as far to say that he doesn't even know he's dead. Others say that he can be seen occasionally, reaching for his cane. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So much of Bill's story fitted with what I thought I had seen. I was cold with fear. Sometime later I spoke with Peggy and asked why she hadn't told me about the ghost of Emmett. She simply told me that she didn't want to scare me, but now did share several of her own strange encounters. Her conclusion was that Emmett simply wanted to keep an eye on things. I don't know whether I believe in ghosts or not. All I can tell you is what I experienced during my time at the Britannia. I never saw the dark figure in the basement again, but I did continue to witness objects go missing and fall off the walls, as did many other people. To this day, many locals still believe that the Britannia pub is haunted. If you enjoyed this week's paranormal story, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel for more tales of the supernatural and the unexplained. Until next time, my friends, happy hauntings.